I mostly read public domain books here on Glenn Reads Books to You, and they were written a long time ago, so they're usually racist, or sexist, or bigoted. But in there somewhere is a story, and that's why those stories are famous. Other times, I read works from independent authors, and they're delightfully not racist. But they might have adult language or adult situations, like, making sex. So that's your warning. But I'm sure you're grown up enough to handle it. Don't write to me complaining. Fireworks. The 4th of July. Oh, son of a... All right, take a seat, you little idiot. I don't know if you can hear out my window, but it's the 4th of July. Oh, it just stopped. Oh. There you go. There's more. Fantastic. The fireworks celebration stopped hours ago. This is just people in my neighborhood being dicks. But it's a holiday where we celebrate a battle, but make it fun for kids. Well, that was close to the house. Mother of God. Welcome to the Glenn Reads Books to You mansion. It's a fun little bit where I pretend to live in a mansion and not just recording in my house with fireworks going off in my neighborhood. This is where I read the hottest public domain books and short stories. This week, we're going to read Let's Get Together by Isaac Asimov. Want to learn a little about the author? Sure, I said that really weird. I hope so. I stole this from Wikipedia. Isaac Asimov was born January 2nd, 1920, and died April 6th, 1992. Great year, the year I graduated high school. He was an American writer and professor of biochemistry at Boston University, and during his lifetime, Asimov was considered one of the quote-unquote big three science fiction writers, along with Robert A. Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke. A prolific writer, he wrote or edited more than 500 books. He also wrote an estimated 90,000 letters and postcards. Does that count? I've written letters in the past, back when people sent letters. Does that make me an author of some sort? Best known for his hard science fiction, Asimov also wrote mysteries and fantasy, as well as popular science and other nonfiction. Want to hear some fun facts that I stole from MetsFloss.com? Isaac Asimov wrote a movie musical for Paul McCartney. Look in the Boston University archives and you will find a story outline called 5 and 5 and 1. Asimov penned it for Paul McCartney, a longtime science fiction fan who had asked him to write a screenplay for a sci-fi musical. Weird. The former Beatles' ideas centered on a brand that realized it was being impersonated by aliens. Oh, a band, not a brand. Kind of the same thing. And he thought Asimov would be the perfect writer for the job. Sadly, McCartney didn't like Asimov's treatment, and the movie was never made. Isaac Asimov was an on-again, off-again member of Mensa. Asimov wasn't shy about joining clubs. Some of the groups he belonged to were the Baker Street Regulars, an exclusive organization for Sherlock Holmes fans. The Gilbert and Sullivan Society, and the Wodehouse Society. Oh, P.G. Wodehouse. I have got a bad thing with that guy. And Mensa. After joining the oldest high IQ society in the world, Asimov participated in events and was an honorary vice president. But he drifted in and out of active membership. Oh, thank God. That's the grandfather clock telling me to shut up. Why don't we go down to the library where it might be quieter and read this beautiful short story. Well, there you go. It's quieter here in the library, so why don't you get yourself settled? Let's start reading Let's Get Together by Isaac Asimov. A kind of peace had endured for a century, and people had forgotten what anything else was like. Oh, they would have scarcely known how to react had they discovered what a kind of war had finally come. Certainly, Elias Lynn, chief of the Bureau of Robotics wasn't sure how he ought to react when he finally found out, the Bureau of Robotics was headquartered in Cheyenne, in line with the century-old trend toward decentralization, and Lin stared dubiously at the young security officer from Washington who had brought the news. Elias Lin was a large man, almost charmingly homely, with pale blue eyes that bulged a bit. Men weren't usually comfortable under the stare of those eyes, but the security officer remained calm. Lin decided that his first reaction ought to be incredulity. Hell, it was incredulity. He just didn't believe it! Exclamation point. He eased himself back in his chair and said, how certain is the information? Well, the security officer, who had introduced himself as Ralph G. Breckenridge, had presented credentials to match, had the softness of youth about him. Full lips, plump cheeks that flushed easily, and guileless eyes. All his clothing was out of line with Cheyenne, but it suited the universally air-conditioned Washington, where security, despite everything, was still centered. Well, Breckenridge flushed and said, there's no doubt about it. Well, you people know all about them, I suppose, said Lin, and was unable to keep a trace of sarcasm out of his tongue. He was not particularly aware of his use of slightly stressed pronoun in his reference to the enemy, the equivalent of capitalization in print. It was a cultural habit of his generation, and the one preceding. No one said the East, or the Reds, or the Soviets, or the Russians anymore. That would have been too confusing, since some of them weren't of the East, weren't Reds, Soviets, and especially not Russians. It was much simpler to say we and they, and much more precise. Travelers had frequently reported that they did the same in reverse. Over there, they were we in the appropriate language, and we were they. Scarcely anyone gave thought to such a thing anymore. It was all quite comfortable and casual. There's no hatred, even. At the beginning, it had been called the Cold War. Now it was only a game. Almost a good-natured game, with unspoken rules and a kind of decency about it. Lin said abruptly, why should they want to disturb the situation? He rose and stood staring at a wall map of the world and split into two regions with faint edgings of color. An irregular portion of the map on the left was edged in a mild green. A smaller but just as irregular portion on the right of the map was bordered in washed-out pink. We and they. The map hadn't changed much in a century. The loss of Formosa and the gain of East Germany, East Germany, some 80 years before, had been the last territorial switch of importance. There had been another change, though, and that was significant enough that it was in the colors. 2 generations before, their territory had been brooding, bloody red. Ours was a pure and undefiled white. Now, there was a neutrality about the colors. Lin had their maps, and it was the same on their side. That's there with a capital T. They wouldn't do it, he said. They are doing it, said Breckenridge, and you had better accustom yourself to the fact. Of course, sir, I realize that it isn't pleasant to think that they may be that far ahead of us in robotics. His eyes remained as guileless as ever, but the hidden knife edges of the words plunged deep, and Lin quivered at the impact. Of course, that would account for why the chief of robotics learned of this so late, and through a security officer at that. He had lost caste in the eyes of the government. If robotics had really failed in the struggle, Lin would expect no political mercy. Lin said wearily, Yeah, even if what you say is true, they're not far ahead of us. We could build humanoid robots. Have we, sir? Yes. As a matter of fact, we built a few models for experimental purposes. Well, they were doing that 10 years ago. They've made 10 years progress since. Lin was disturbed. He wondered if his incredulity, I can say it, concerning the whole business were really the result of a wounded pride and a fear for his job and reputation. He was embarrassed by the possibility that it might be so, and yet he was forced to defense. He said, look, young man, The stalemate between them and us has never been perfect in every detail, you know. Oh, they have always been ahead in one facet or another, and we in some other facet or another. And if they're ahead of us right now, robotics, it's because they've placed a greater proportion of their effort into robotics than we have. And that means that some other branch of endeavor has received a greater share of our efforts than it has of theirs. It would mean we are ahead in force field research, or I don't know, hyperatomics, perhaps. Well, Lynn felt distressed at his own statement and that the stalemate wasn't perfect. Oh, it was true enough that there was one great danger threatening the world. The world depended on stalemate being as perfect as possible. If the small unevenness was always exited, overbalanced, or too far one direction or the other. Almost at the beginning of what had been the Cold War, both sides had developed thermonuclear weapons, and war became unthinkable. Competition switched from military to the economic and psychological, and had stayed there ever since. But always there was the driving effort on each side to break the stalemate, to develop a parry for every possible thrust, that could not be parried in time? Oh, something that would make war possible again. And that was not because either side wanted war so desperately, but because both were afraid that the other side would make the crucial discovery first. For 100 years, each side had kept the struggle even, and in the process, peace had been maintained for 100 years, while, as byproducts of the continuously intensive research, force fields had been produced, and solar energy and insect control, and robots. Each side was making a beginning in the understanding of mental X. Okay, I'm saying it right. Which was the name given to the biochemistry and biophysics of thought. Each side had its outposts on the moon and Mars. Mankind was advancing in giant strides under a forced draft. It was even necessary for both sides to be as decent and humane as possible amongst themselves, lest through cruelty and tyranny friends be made for the other side. It couldn't be that the stalemate would now be broken and that there would be war. Lynn said, I'm going to consult one of my men. Nah, I want his opinion. Is he trustworthy? Lynn looked disgusted. Good Lord, what man in robotics has not been investigated and cleared to death by your people? Yes, I vouch for him. And if you can't trust a man like Humphrey Carl Laszlo, then you're in no position to face the kind of attack you say they're launching, no matter what else we do. I've heard of Laszlo, said Breckenridge. Good, does he pass? Yes. Then I'll have him in, and we'll find out what he thinks about the possibility of robotics could invade the USA. Not exactly, said Breckenridge softly. You don't accept the full truth. Find out what he thinks about the facts, and robots have already invaded the USA. Laszlo was the grandson of a Hungarian who had broken through what had then been called the Iron Curtain, and he had a comfortable above suspicion feeling about himself because of it. He was thick-set and balding, with a pugnacious look, graven forever on his snub face. But his accent was clear, Harvard, and was almost excessively soft-spoken. To Lynn, who was conscious that after years of administration, he was no longer an expert in various phases of modern robotics, Laszlo was a comforting receptacle for complete knowledge. Lynn felt better because of the man's mere presence. Lynn said, what do you think? A scowl twisted Laszlo's face ferociously. That they're far ahead of us, completely incredible. It would mean that they've produced humanoids that could not be told from humans at close quarters. It would mean a considerable advance in robomentalics. I'm not struggling. This is fine. I've mastered this. Oh, you're personally involved, said Breckenridge coldly, leaving a professional pride out of account. Exactly. Why is it impossible that they be ahead of us? Laszlo shrugged. I assure you that I'm well acquainted with their literature on robotics. Oh, I know approximately where they are. You know approximately where they want you to think they are, is what you really mean, corrected Breckenridge. Have you ever visited the other side? I haven't, said Laszlo shortly. Nor you, Dr. Lynn? Lynn said. No, I haven't either. Breckenridge says, has any robotics man visited the other side in 25 years? He asked the question with a kind of confidence that indicated he knew the answer. Well, for a matter of seconds, the atmosphere is heavy with thought. Discomfort crossed Laszlo's broad face. He said, as a matter of fact, they haven't held any conferences on robotics in a long time. In 25 years, said Breckenridge. Isn't that significant? Maybe, said Laszlo reluctantly. Something else bothers me, though. None of them have ever come to our conferences on robotics, none that I can remember. Were they invited? Asked Breckenridge. Lynn, staring and worried, interposed quickly. Of course. Breckenridge said, do they refuse attendance to any other types of scientific conferences we hold? I don't know, said Laszlo. He was pacing the floor now. I haven't heard of any cases. Have you, Chief? No, said Lynn. Breckenridge said, wouldn't you say that it was though they didn't want to be put in the position of having to return any such invitation, as though they were afraid one of their men might talk too much? That was exactly how it seemed, and Lynn felt a helpless conviction that security's story was true after all steel over them. Why else had there been no contact between the sides on robotics? There had been a cross-fertilizing trickle of researchers moving in both directions on a strictly one-for-one basis for years. Why would they do that if they're trying to keep their advancements secret? I'm not saying this is a bad story or nothing. I'm just asking the question, why would you have them cross-fertilizing researchers moving in both directions if they're trying to keep their shit secret? One-for-one basis for years, dating back to the days of Eisenhower and Khrushchev. Oh, there were a great many good motives for that. An honest appreciation of the supernatural character of science. Impulses of friendliness that are hard to wipe out completely individual human beings. The desire to be exposed to a fresh and interesting outlook. To have your own slightly stale notions greeted by others as fresh and interesting. Well, the governments themselves were anxious that this continue. There was always the obvious thought that by learning all you could and telling as little as you could, your own side would gain in the exchange. But not in the case of robotics, not there. Such a little thing to carry conviction, and a thing, moreover, that they had all known all along. Lynn thought darkly, we've taken the complacent way out. Because the other side had done nothing publicly on robotics, it had been tempting to sit back smugly and be comfortable in the assurance of superiority. Why hadn't it seemed possible, even likely, that they were hiding superior cards, a trump hand, for the proper time? Laszlo said shakingly, what do we do? It was obvious that the same line of thought had carried the same conviction to him. Do? Parroted Lynn. It was hard to think right now of anything but the complete horror that came with the conviction. There were 10 humanoid robots somewhere in the United States, each one carrying a fragment of a TC bomb. TC! Exclamation point. The race for sheer horror and bombery, bomb-ury, had ended there. TC, total conversion. The sun was no longer a synonym one could use. Total conversion made the sun a penny candle. 10 humanoids, each completely harmless in separation, could, by the simple act of coming together, exceed critical mass and Lynn rose to his feet heavily, the dark pouches under his eyes, which ordinarily lent his ugly face a look of savage foreboding, more prominent than ever. It's going to be up to us to figure out ways and means of telling a humanoid from a human and then finding the humanoids. How quickly? Muttered Laszlo. Well, not later than 5 minutes before they get together, barked Lynn, and now I don't know what that'll be. Breckenridge nodded. I'm glad you're with us now, sir. I'm to bring you back to Washington for a conference, you know. Lynn raised his eyebrows. Yeah, right. He wondered if he had delayed longer in being convinced he might not have been replaced forthwith, if some other chief of the Bureau of Robotics might not be conferring in Washington. He suddenly wished earnestly that exactly that had come to pass. The first presidential assistant was there, the Secretary of Science, the Secretary of Security, Lynn himself, and Breckenridge. 5 of them sitting about a table in the dungeons of an underground fortress near Washington. Presidential Assistant Jeffries was an impressive man, handsome in a white-haired and just a trifle jowly fashion, solid, thoughtful, and unobtrusive, politically as a presidential assistant ought to be. He spoke incisively. Well, there are three questions that face us as I see it. First, when are the humanoids going to get together? Second, where are they going to get together? Third, how do we stop them before they get together? Secretary of Science Amberly nodded convulsively at that and had been Dean of Northwestern Engineering before his appointment. He was thin, sharp-featured, and noticeably edgy. Oh, his forefinger traced slow circles on the table. And as far as when they'll get together, he said, I suppose it's definite that it won't be for some time. Why you say that? Asked Lynn sharply. They've been in the U.S. At least a month already, so security says. Well, Lynn turned automatically to look at Breckenridge, and Secretary of Security McAllister interceded at the glance. McAllister said, the information is reliable. Don't let Breckenridge's apparent youth fool you, Dr. Lynn. That's part of the value to us. Actually, he's 34 and has been with the department for 10 years. He's been in Moscow for nearly a year. Without him, none of this terrible danger would be known to us. We have most of the details. Well, not the crucial ones, said Lynn. McAllister, his security, smiled frostily. Oh, his heavy chin and close-set eyes were well known to the public, for almost nothing else about him was. He said, well, we're all finitely human, Dr. Lynn. Agent Breckenridge has done a great deal. Presidential Assistant Jeffries cut in. Well, let us say we have a certain amount of time. If action at the instant were necessary, it would have happened before this. It seems likely that they are waiting for a specific time. If we knew the place, perhaps the time would become self-evident. If they're going to TC a target, they'll want to cripple us as much as possible, so it would seem that a major city would have to be it. In either case, a major metropolis is the only target worth a TC bomb. I think there are four possibilities. Washington as the administrative center, New York as the financial center, and Detroit and Pittsburgh as the two chief industrial centers. McAllister of Security said, no, I vote for New York. Administration and industry have both been decentralized to the point where the destruction of any particular city will prevent instant retaliation. Burp. Then why New York? Asked Amberly of Science, perhaps more sharply than he intended. Finance has been decentralized as well. Well, that's a question of morale. It may be that they intend to destroy our will to resist, to induce surrender by the sheer horror of the first blow. The greatest destruction of human life would be in the New York metropolitan area. Pretty cold-blooded, muttered Lynn. Well, I know, said McAllister Security, but they're capable of it. And if they thought it would mean final victory at a stroke, wouldn't we, Presidential Assistant Jeffries brushed back his white hair. Well, let's assume the worst. Let's assume that New York will be destroyed sometime during the winter, preferably immediately after a serious blizzard, when communications are at their worst, and the disruption of utilities and food supplies in fringe areas will be the most serious in their effect. Now, how do we stop them? Amberly of Science could only say, finding 10 men and 220 million is an awfully small needle in an awfully large haystack. Well, Jeffrey shook his head. You got it wrong. 10 humanoids among 220 million humans. Well, no difference, said Amberly of Science. We don't know that a humanoid can be differentiated from a human at sight. Probably not. He looked at Lynn. They all did. Lynn said heavily, we in Cheyenne couldn't make one that would pass as a human in daylight. But they can, said McAllister of Security, and not only physically, we're sure of that, they've advanced mentalic procedures to the point where they can reel off the microelectronic pattern of the brain and focus it into the positronic pathways of the robot. Lynn stared. Are you implying that they can create a replica of a human being complete with personality and memory? I do. Of specific human beings? That's right. Is this also based on Agent Breckenridge's findings? Yes, the evidence can't be disputed. Lynn bent his head and thought for a moment. And then he said, then 10 men in the United States are not men, but humanoids. But the originals would have to have been available to them. They couldn't be... Orientals. Who would be too easy to spot so that they would have to be East Europeans? And how would they be introduced to this country then? With the radar network of the entire world border as tight as a drum. Oh, how could they introduce any individual, human or humanoid, without us knowing about it? Well, it seems a good place to take a break. Why don't we go to my basement where it's even more quiet? We really don't have to worry about fireworks, which I'm sure scare you like a dog. Why don't we go down to the basement where I made a really cool little pad for cool people to hang out and smoke weed and play video games and also read about the latest upcoming books from Penguin Random House. Ah, there you are. Go ahead, take a seat in that one folding chair underneath that naked light bulb as I stand here, underneath this naked light bulb, and play this guitar for you. Huh? I've made this place real cool. I've got a futon. I've got a rug. I got a coffee table, and I finally got the tube television, though I don't have anything to hook it up to. It's, the tube television's so damn old that I can't even get, like, a Google TV connected up to it. But I can let you know about the latest upcoming books from Penguin Random House. The Change by Whoopi Goldberg. And Jamie Paglia, illustrated by Sunkanami Akinboy. Let's learn about The Change. Whoopi Goldberg brings new meaning to what it means to be a superhero in a new graphic novel! Exclamation point. Isabel Frost is a woman who has spent her life as a wife, mother, grandmother, a life she feels isn't all that she had hoped for, with a husband who's grown in another direction, a college graduate with a degree in science. Isabel is an amazing gamer who plays with people from all over the country. They don't really understand how gaming works. It's all over the world. She also has smack in the middle of a menopause, which, along with chills and hot flashes, also give her some unexpected superpowers. Yeah, and with the help of her comic-loving grandson and a reverent best friend, she must learn to control her abilities and embrace her new identity as, in all bold letters, the change. Both the change of life and, in all caps, her surprising and extraordinary superpowers. That sounds like something that it's like the kind of jokes and stuff that an adult would make. It involves menopause. There's going to be a lot of jokes around that, I'm sure. It's Whoopi Goldberg. She is who she is. She's been on The View for a long time. She's not making, what's that Nun movie? Her finest movie? Was it Nonsense? I forget what it's called. The Change by Whoopi Goldberg. You can get it for hardcover at $17.99 from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Bookshop.org, Hudson Booksellers, Powell's, Target, and you'll probably find this on the shelf next to some sort of coffee table book about The View and just how they're never constantly offending people and just being out of touch and whatever at Walmart. But with that, why don't we go back upstairs to the library and continue reading this story? Now, well, there you are. You're back. Before I came upstairs, I just spent about, 15 minutes taking a break on TikTok and watched a woman spin a lightsaber around out in her backyard while fireworks were going off. That's how I spend my time. Let's get back into the story. McAllister of security said, it can't be done. Oh, there are certain legitimate seepages across the border, businessmen, pilots, even tourists. They're watched, of course, on both sides. Still, 10 of them might have been kidnapped and used as models for humanoids. Oh, the humanoids would then be sent back in their place, since we wouldn't expect such a substitution. Stupid Kindle. There we go. Would pass us by. If they were Americans to begin with, there would be no difficulty in their getting into this country. It's as simple as that. And then their friends and family could not tell the difference. Oh, we must assume so. Believe me, we've been waiting for any report that might imply sudden attacks of amnesia or trouble, some changes in personality. We've checked on thousands. Amberly of Science stared at his fingertips. I think ordinary measures won't work. The attack must come from the Bureau of Robotics, and I depend on the chief of that bureau. Again, eyes turned sharply, expectantly, on Lynn. Lynn felt bitterness arise. It seemed to him that this was what the conference came to and was intended for. Nothing that had been said had not been said before, and he was sure of that. There was no solution to the problem, no pregnant suggestion. It was a device for the record, a device on the part of men who gravely feared defeat and who wished the responsibility for it placed clearly and unequivocally on someone else. And yet there was justice in it. It was in robotics that we, in all caps, had fallen short, and Lynn was not Lynn merely. He was Lynn of robotics, and the responsibility had to be his. He said, I'll do what I can. He spent a wakeful night, and there was a haggardness about both body and soul. When he sought and obtained another interview with Presidential Assistant Jeffries the next morning, Breckenridge was there, and though Lynn would have preferred a private conference, he could see the justice in the situation. It was obvious that Breckenridge had attained enormous influence with the government as a result of his successful intelligence work. Well, why not? Lynn said, Sir, I am considering the possibility that we are hopping uselessly to enemy piping. In what way? I'm sure that however impatient the public may grow at times, and however legislators sometimes find it expedient to talk, the government at least recognizes the world's stalemate to be beneficial. They must recognize it also. 10 humanoids with 1 TC bomb is a trivial way of breaking the stalemate. The destruction of 15 million human beings is scarcely trivial. It is, from the world power standpoint. It would not be so to demoralize us as to make us surrender or to cripple us as convince us that we could not win. There would just be the same old planetary death war that both sides have avoided for so long and so successfully. And all that they would have accomplished is to force us to fight minus 1 city. It's not enough. Well, what do you suggest? Said Jeffries coldly. That they do not have 10 humanoids in our country? That there is not a TC bomb waiting to get together? Well, I'll agree that those things are here, but perhaps for some reason greater than just midwinter bomb madness. Such as? Well, it may be that the physical destruction resulting from the humanoids getting together is not the worst thing that can happen to us. What about the moral and intellectual destruction that comes from of their being here at all? With all due respect to Agent Breckenridge, what if they intended, in italics, for us to find out about the humanoids? What if the humanoids were never supposed to get together, but merely just remain separate in order to give us something to worry about? Why? Well, tell me this. What measures have already been taken against the humanoids? I suppose that security is going through the files of all the citizens who have ever been across the border close enough to make kidnapping possible. I know, since McAllister mentioned it yesterday, that they are following up suspicious psychiatric cases. What else? Jeffrey said, small X-ray devices are being installed in key places in large cities, in the mass arenas, for instance, when 10 humanoids might slip in amongst thousands of spectators of a football game or an air polo match. Oh, that's futuristic. Air polo. Exactly. In concert halls and churches? Well, we must start somewhere. We can't all do it at once. Particularly when panic must be avoided, said Lynn. Isn't that so? It wouldn't do to have the public realize that at any unpredictable moment some unpredictable city and its human contents would suddenly cease to exist. Well, I suppose it's obvious. What are you driving at? Lynn said strenuously that a growing fraction of our national effort will be diverted entirely into a nasty problem of what Amberly called finding a very small needle in a very large haystack. We'll be chasing our tails madly, while they increase their research to lead to the point where we can find that no one can catch up. When we must surrender without the chance of ever snapping our fingers in retaliation. Well, consider further that the news will leak out as more and more people become involved in our countermeasures and more people begin to guess at what we're doing. Then what? The panic might do us more harm than any of the TC bomb. Well, the presidential assistant said irritably, "Oh, in heaven's name, man. What do you suggest we do then?" "Nothing," said Lynn. "Call their bluff. Live as we have lived, and gamble that they don't dare break the stalemate for that sake of a one-bomb head start." "Impossible," said Jeffries. "Completely impossible. The welfare of all of us is largely in my hands, and doing nothing is the one thing I cannot do. I agree with you, perhaps X-ray machines in the sports arenas are kind of a skin-deep measure that won't be effective, but it has to be done so that that people in the aftermath do not come to the bitter conclusion that we tossed our country away for the sake of a subtle line of reasoning that encouraged do-nothingism. In fact, our counter-gambit will be active indeed." "In what way?" Presidential Assistant Jeffries looked at Breckinridge. The young security officer, Hitherto calmly silent, said, "It's no use talking about the possible future break of the stalemate when the stalemate is broken now. It doesn't matter whether these humanoids explode or do not. Maybe they are only a bait to divert us, as you say. But the fact remains that we are a quarter of a century behind in robotics, and that may be fatal. What other advances in robotics will be there to surprise us if our war does start? The only answer is to divert our entire force immediately, now, into a crash program of robotics research. And the first problem is to find humanoids. Call it an exercise of robotics, if you will, or call it a prevention the death of 15 million men, women, and children." Well, Lynn shook his head helplessly. "But you can't. You'd be playing into their hands. How they want us lured into one blind alley while they're free to advance in all other directions." Jeffries said impatiently, "That's your guess. Breckinridge has made a suggestion through channels and the government has approved, and we will begin with an all-science conference." "All science?" Breckinridge said. "We have listed every important scientist of every branch of natural science. They'll all be at Cheyenne, but there'll be only one point on the agenda: how to advance robotics. The major specific subheading under that will be how to develop a receiving device for the electromagnetic fields of the cerebral cortex that will be sufficiently delicate to distinguish between the protoplasmic human brain and the prototronic, positronic, humanoid brain." Jeffries said, "We had hoped you would be willing to be in charge of the conference." "I was not consulted in this. Obviously, time was short, sir. Do you agree to be in charge?" Well, Lynn smiled briefly. It was a matter of responsibility again. The responsibility must be clearly that of Lynn of robotics. He had the feeling it would be Breckinridge who would really be in charge, but what could he do? He said, "I agree." Breckinridge and Lynn returned together to Cheyenne, where that evening Laszlo listened with a sullen mistrust to Lynn's description of coming events. Laszlo said, "While you were gone, Chief, I started putting 5 experimental models of humanoid structure through the testing procedures. Our men are at a 12-hour day with 3 shifts overlapping. If we've got to arrange a conference, we're going to be crowded and red-taped out of everything. Work will come to a halt." Breckinridge said, "That'll only be temporary. You will gain more than you lose." Laszlo scowled. A bunch of astrophysicists and geochemists won't help it with a damn towards robotics. Views from specialists of other fields may be helpful. Are you sure? How do we know that there is any way of detecting brainwaves, or that, even if we can, that there's a way of differentiating human and humanoid in a brainwave pattern? Who set up the project anyway?" "I did," said Breckinridge. "You did? Are you robotics man?" The young security agent said calmly, "I have studied robotics." Well, that's not the same thing. "I have had access to text material dealing with Russian robotics in Russian, top secret material well in advance of anything you have here," Lynn said ruefully. "He has us there, Laszlo." It was on the basis of that material, Breckenridge went on, that I have suggested this particular line of investigation. It is reasonably certain that in copying off the electromagnetic pattern of a specific human mind into specific positronic brain, a perfectly exact duplicate cannot be made. For one thing, the most complicated positronic brain, small enough to fit into a human-sized skull, is hundreds of times less complex than that of the human brain. Oh, it can't pick up overtones, therefore, and it must be in some way to take advantage of that fact. Laszlo looked impressed despite himself, and Lynn smiled grimly. Oh, it was easy to resent Breckenridge and the coming intrusion of several hundred scientists of non-robotic specialties, but the problem itself was an intriguing one. There was that consolation at least. It came to him quietly. Lynn found that he had nothing to do but sit in his office alone with an executive position that had grown merely titular, and perhaps that helped. Oh, it gave him time to think, to picture the creative scientists of half a world converging on Cheyenne. It was Breckenridge who, with cool efficiency, was handling the details of preparation. There had been a kind of, confidence in the way he had said, "Let's get together and we'll lick them." Let's get together. It came to Lynn so quietly that anyone watching Lynn at that moment might have seen his eyes blink slowly twice, but surely nothing more. He did what he had to do with a whirling detachment that kept him calm when he felt that by all rights he ought to be going mad. He sought out Breckenridge in the other improvised quarters. Breckenridge was alone and frowning. "Is anything wrong, sir?" Lynn said wearily, "Everything's all right, I think. I've invoked martial law." "What?" "As chief of the division, I can do so, and I am of the opinion that the situation warrants it. Over my division, I can be a dictator. Chalk up one for the beauties of decentralization." "You will rescind that order immediately," Breckenridge took a step forward. "When Washington hears this, you'll be ruined." "Well, I'm ruined anyways. Do you think I don't realize that I've been set up for this role with the greatest villain in American history, the man who let them break the stalemate? I have nothing to lose, and perhaps a great deal to gain." Well, he laughed a little wildly. "With a little target of the division of robotics will be, Breckenridge? Only a few thousand men to be killed by a TC bomb capable of wiping out 300 square miles, 1 microsecond. Oh, but 500 of those men would be our greatest scientists. Oh, we would be in a particular position of having to fight a war with our brain shot out or surrendering. I think we'd surrender." "Oh, but this is impossible. Lynn, do you hear me? Do you understand? How could the humanoids pass our security provisions? How could they get together?" "But they are getting together. We're helping them do so. We're ordering them to do so. Our scientists visit the other side. Breckenridge, they visit them regularly. And you made a point of how strange it was that no one in robotics did. Well, 10 of those scientists are still there, and in their place, 10 humanoids are converging on Cheyenne." "Well, that's a ridiculous guess. I think it's a good one, Breckenridge, but it wouldn't work unless we knew humanoids were in America, so that we would call the conference in the first place. Quite a coincidence that you brought the news of the humanoids and suggested the conference and suggested the agenda and are running the show and know exactly which scientists were invited. Period. Did you make sure the right 10 were included? Question mark. "Dr. Lynn," cried Breckenridge in outrage, poised to rush forward. Lynn said, "Don't move. Oh, I got a blaster here. We'll just wait for the scientists to get here one by one, and one by one we'll x-ray them. One by one we'll monitor them for radioactivity. No two will get together without being checked, and if all 500 are clear, I'll give you my blaster and surrender to you. Only I think we'll find the 10 humanoids. Sit down, Breckenridge." Well, they both sat. Lynn said, "We wait. When I'm tired, Laszlo will spell me. We wait." Professor Manuelo Jimenez of the Institute of Higher Studies of Buenos Aires exploded while the stratospheric jet on which he traveled was 3 miles above the Amazon Valley. Oh, it was a simple chemical explosion, but it was enough to destroy the plane. Dr. Herman Leibowitz of MIT exploded in a monorail, killing 25 people and injuring hundreds of others. In a similar manner, Dr. Auguste Marin of l'Institut Nucléonique of Montreal and 7 others died at various stages of their journey to Cheyenne. Laszlo hustled in, pale-faced and stammering. With the first news of it, it had only been 2 hours that Lynn had sat there facing Breckenridge, blaster in hand. Laszlo said, I thought you were nuts, Chief, but you were right. They were humanoids. They had to be. He turned to stare with his hate-filled eyes at Breckenridge. Only they were warned. He warned them, and now there won't be one left intact, not one to study. God, cried Lynn, and in a frenzy of haste thrust his blaster back out towards Breckenridge and fired. The security man's neck vanished, the torso fell, the head dropped, thudded against the floor, and rolled crookedly. Lynn moaned, I didn't understand. I thought he was a traitor, nothing more. And Laszlo stood immobile, mouth open, for a moment incapable of speech. Lynn said wildly, Sure, he warned them. But how could he do so while sitting in a chair, unless he were equipped with a built-in radio transmission? Don't you see it? Breckenridge had been in Moscow. The real Breckenridge is still there. Oh, my God. There were 11 of them. Laszlo managed a hoarse squeak. Why did he explode? Now, he was hanging on, I suppose, to make sure that the others had received the message and they were safely destroyed. Lord, when you brought the news and I realized the truth, I couldn't shoot fast enough. God knows how few seconds I have to beat him to it. Laszlo said shakily, At least I will have one to study. He bent to put his fingers on the sticky fluid trickling out of the mangled remains at the neck and the headless body. Not blood, but high-grade machine oil. Well, with that, seems like a good time for us to go downstairs and review what the hell we just read. Well, there you go. Why don't you take a little seat? Go ahead. Reach over to that baboon skull on the coffee table, and if you remove the top portion of its head, you will find cigarettes. Yeah, wife's birds. Go ahead, light one up, and let's review what we read. Let's get together a story by Isaac Asimov that starts out as I'm not as familiar with Isaac Asimov. I've read some of his stuff and everything, but it's like there's people that are really, really into this guy. And I can see why. He's a pretty well-thought-out writer. He kind of proposes this kind of future where everyone is living in a kind of stalemate, which is interesting because when I used to play Quake 3 back in 1999, I read about how one person, because they had little robots, so you could play by yourself. You could run around on this platform, shoot at little robots. The robots are pretty good. They chase after you and kill you a lot of the times. And so it was like kind of like a game everyone was really into for a while. One guy had his own server, and he forgot that it was running for like 5 years. He had the server running, he used it, but he forgot that he had Quake running on it for 5 years. So all of a sudden, he opens up Quake, and he looks, and all the robots are just standing completely still. Apparently, they had gone through every single version of, or every single tactic, or every single plan you could do to try to, like, kill everyone. And over time, they just stalemated, and they just sat there staring at each other. So when suddenly he arrived with his character walking through the platform, he just saw these guys just standing there. And as he walked by, they just kind of turned their little bodies and kept looking at him. And so it was kind of weird. And then once he shot one of them, well, it threw everything into chaos, because suddenly they're starting all over again. So in this case, this story is kind of similar, where Russia and America have kind of stalemated, the East, whatever. They stalemated, and it was the best possible option. And nothing should disrupt this, or else everything's going to fly into chaos. So, pretty good premise. We learned later that Russia didn't have the power that it really had, but as far as this author knew, they were just as equal to the rest of Europe and America and everything. So he you propose this thing where you have these secret robots walking around. You can't tell if they're human or not. They're perfect. And you can't tell, what do? Also, this is going to upset their gentle balance. So then it becomes, I imagine, was going to be this like story about using technology to figure out who it is and probably just make up a lot of answers that aren't there. Like, it turns out in the end we just created a robot that was smart enough to know other robots and then killed those robots, is what I was expecting. But no, he's a good writer. So instead of coming up with a sci-fi solution, he just used basic logic. Well, not basic, but he used logic and, kind of like sleuth work. So as soon as he starts to realize these people haven't come back from their convention, he realizes, they could have been killed. Their brains could have been stuck into a positronic brain, and but they're not as intelligent as a real brain, so there's limits, and we can find those limits. And realized one of them's been planted here to drive forward our entire efforts to find them, which means that we'll fail. Pretty interesting. So he sussed it up because the guy says, let's get together. Or let's do it together, or whatever the hell this book's called. And then that was the kind of giveaway, because why does this person that he is convinced is like glory hungry and wants to do everything and get the credit himself, suddenly kind of concerned about making sure everyone gets together to come up with this idea, when, in that industry, maybe a lot of people are just kind of like, nope, I've got the answer and this is what we're doing. So that was his giveaway, and it was pretty good. Well, so there you go. Never doubt the power of the human mind. Well, thanks for listening, and I will probably see you next week. Well, it appears you found me in the part of the podcast I hate the most, where I tell you all about the places on the internet where you can find me. You can tell I hate this because of the sound effects making it sound like a stormy night in the drawing room of the damned. Now, there's that. Are you cool? I like cool people. It's the reason why I got involved in this business to begin with, just to meet cool people, not losers. So if you're cool, feel free to go over to my website, nuzzlehouse.com. But if you go there, you get to hear some of the other stuff that I and my wife work on, like the Radio Mystery Theater show, where we try to recreate the same show that used to be on in the 70s, but they don't make any episodes anymore. So we make our own, and we just steal all their commercials. And also Gestating the Curious Mind. We made a Christmas album. If you go to our link tree, you can see that we made a Christmas album. It's the first thing we did after getting married, which I think everyone should do when they get married, is start talking about the Christmas album they're going to make. And we're working on a new show where we give relationship advice by reading paranormal smut. And since I think you might be cool, you can always just email me directly. glenn.nuzzles@gmail.com. But don't email if you're a nerdlinger or a dork. Now, back to business. I can't believe I drank all of them already. There's got to be one left.